In this video, we are going to learn as to how to create an ambient occlusion map and how to implement it using Photoshop. Uh, for those of you who are new to the term ambient occlusion, it is also commonly referred to as contact shadow pass. It's typically a black and white uh, pass. I'll show you what it looks like. Yeah, so it's typically a sort of a grayscale pass, and it's typically used to enhance or highlight the contact shadows created by surfaces that are really close to each other. This is going to increase the contrast of our image, and it's going to enhance the way our image is going to look. So we'll start with the setup that we have here. Just to begin with, this particular image that we have is called as a beauty pass, and we are going to generate something like this, which is kind of like an ambient occlusion pass from what we have. Now, creating an ambient occlusion pass initially before Arnold was a lot of work. So thanks to Arnold, we now have a simple material that we can apply and adjust to create the kind of ambient occlusion that we need. What we do not need for the ambient occlusion passes uh, the lights. So I'm going to simply select the lights and get rid of it. I'm hoping that at this point you guys have saved um, this file multiple times, so you're not at the risk of losing any work that you've done. Let's start out by selecting our objects. I'm going to right click on it and simply say assign new material. Let's go back to our Arnold tab, and this time the material I'm looking at is called AI Ambient Occlusion. So there's my ambient occlusion material. For those of you who click on the outside and lose those properties by mistake, remember you can always select uh, one of the pieces of geometry that you have assigned this material to, and in the attribute editor you should be able to find the ambient occlusion um, parameters and the material itself. So let's go ahead and render this out. Let's see what this looks like. And it's going to take somewhere about 9 to 10 seconds to render something like this out. So we'll give this it's about 9 seconds. Now there's a couple of issues with this. Number one, um, there's some sampling issue over here. It's a whole bunch of noise that we need to get rid of. In addition to this, it's important to remember that the ambient occlusion pass is used to enhance contact shadows. So the contact shadows are really important, but this sort of gray that's spilling out into the surfaces, into the pieces of geometry, is just going to darken our entire imagery. So this gray here is fairly unwanted, but these contact shadows are really what I'm interested in. It's a bit easier for me to show you guys why this image doesn't really work by actually trying to work with this image. So let me just save this image out, and let's call this occlusion1.png. Now it's important that you save it as a PNG image because I really want this alpha to be taken into consideration, because you can see that out here uh, we have sort of like a dark area, which means there's a lack of surfaces in there. I want that to reflect into the image format that you're saving, and the JPGs are simply not going to save that for us. So I'm saving this as a PNG image. Let's also um, save a snapshot of this. Let's go back into selecting the object. Now first off, these samples can be very easily fixed. All we have to do is jump up the sample values. Let's say 6. Say play. I'm going to let this render out. It's going to take a little more time. So it's taken far more time. It was taken 9 seconds and now it's taking 26 seconds. But if I save a snapshot of this, you can see that the noise has definitely cleared out, which is great. Now let's focus on getting rid of the spillage here, and you can do that by working your fall off. Now see, as I start increasing the fall off value, um, the shadow becomes more and more localized, more and more localized, more and more localized. Now that's far too less for me to work with. I'm going to work with a value like 1.5 perhaps. And yeah, I'm fairly happy with how that looks because this image is particularly focusing on just the contact shadows, which is pretty awesome. You can see that the spillage, the gray that I was seeing initially has been considerably reduced. I still see some grays out here, which we can definitely work by working the fall off value. But right now I'm just going to settle for this for the sake of the video. Just going to let this render out. And so that's something I'm fairly happy with. So let's go ahead and save this image. Uh, occlusion2.png. You see that in Arnold, when we're trying to save images, we are basically just including the extension in the naming convention as we're naming the file, and that's how it knows whether to save a JPG or a PNG or a TIFF or whatever. So I'm just going to say save, and now I'm going to go into Photoshop where I've already opened my beauty pass. Let me quickly go ahead and bring in my two occlusion passes. And I need to make sure that these two occlusion passes are perfectly lined up with my beauty pass, and I'm going to rename these layers too. So first copy this over, okay. Now I'm just going to make sure that these are lining up perfectly. Yep, that's perfect. Go ahead and rename this to beauty occlusion 1, occlusion 2. So let me first hide occlusion 2. So this is what we are working with initially. Okay, so to make the occlusion layer work, simply click on it and change your blending modes from normal to multiply. And if you're failing to see what it has done to the image, simply hide and unhide the image, and you can see how that occlusion is basically impacting, especially these areas right here. It's kind of bringing in that gray, which is pretty beautiful. Now you can see that the image is kind of becoming slightly duller. Let's just see how our second occlusion pass works. So I'm going to select this. Once again, change the blending mode to multiply, hide and unhide to see how the contact shadow in particular has been enhanced. Now, the spillage of the gray or the fall off value really depends on the aesthetic that you're trying to go for. But as you can see, setting up an ambient occlusion pass in Arnold is incredibly easy.